Everybody, this is Mr. McMahon. This is the second video on second wave feminist writers. I'm going to pick right back up with the third theme. So as we discuss this theme, remember we're trying to differentiate between these 5 big ideas. And this theme is going to be sexual freedom. And what we're going to see is writers that are going to talk explicitly about their sexuality. And this can be both lesbian or heterosexual sex. So they'll talk about experiencing pleasure when they have sex. They'll talk about their breasts, vagina, and so on. And I guess interesting thing I noticed in the anthology is a lot of these poems weren't included. So you can kind of see editors are still uncomfortable with this, and maybe it's still revolutionary. What their goal here is, in the past, primarily male writers have written about the beauty of the female body. This is often called the male gaze, and it imagines a woman as a subject. But if you write about a woman experiencing pleasure and sex, they become active, and it becomes about their experience when that happens. And this ties back to the American tradition of embodying the speaker in order to create a better democracy. This goes all the way back to Walt Whitman, and we see this, of course, in Emily Dickinson's work as well, poems like Wild Nights. So let's look at Olds after making love in winter. And I have a typo here. I should have put a quote to close that. At first, I cannot have even a sheet on me. Anything at all is painful. A plate of iron laid down on my nerves. I lie there in the air as if flying rapidly without moving. Slowly I cool off. Hot, warm, cold, cool, icy, till the skin all over my body is ice. Except at those points, our bodies touch like blossoms of fire. So we're experiencing the pleasure after we made love. Alright, again, this is radical. 50s and 60s are about conformity, and we're going to say it's okay to have sex and have pleasure. And, there was a lot of slut shaming before then, so it's all part of this project of rejecting misogyny. Of course, we see this in popular culture today, where so much of our culture celebrates healthy sexual relationships. Alright, so let's move on to the next theme, which is going to be the radical politics. So, of course, we've already said challenging patriarchy was radical. As we saw in the Feminist Manifesto back in the modernist movement, she asked the question, are you okay with just having jobs, or do you want more? So, the radical feminist movement says we want more. So they want real liberation for women, real equality. They want also racial liberation. They want actual equality. As we saw in some of the background readings, there's an immediate backlash to the gains of civil rights. And we saw also, their leaders were assassinated, and they asked for economic equality. And that's something that these movements aren't able to achieve, even though they agitate for it. Last, they're asking for liberation of gays and lesbians in the movement, primarily lesbians because it's a women's movement. Later waves of feminism are going to move on to the BTQ part, but the earlier wave is often criticizing for mostly focusing on lesbians' rights. So this is somewhat of a weakness. Finally, there's overlaps with these other literary movements like Black Arts and the Chicano movement. I'm going to read from Ansel Dua's work, and excuse me if I mispronounce anything, but this will show some of the radical political agenda. As a mestiza, I have no country. My homeland cast me out. Yet all countries are mine because I'm every woman's sister or potential lover. As a lesbian, I have no race. My own people disclaim me. But I'm all races because there's the queer of me in all races. I'm culturalist because as a feminist, I challenge the collective cultural, religious, male-derived beliefs of Indo-Hispanics and Angles. Yes, I am cultured because I'm participating in the creation of yet another culture. We're going to make a new culture that's equal for all people. And the last thing they try to do is reclaim the domestic sphere. And this is a little bit complicated because in the past women were expected to write about these home spaces. But what the radical feminist movement wants to do is write about home spaces, but not in this quaint way which worships them. So on the right-hand side, we see Griffin's poem, where she writes about how terrible it is to do dishes. This is a poem for a woman doing dishes. This is a poem for a woman doing dishes. It must be repeated. It must be repeated again and again, again and again, because the woman doing dishes, has trouble hearing, Sort of an elegy for the woman stuck in this sphere, and also talking about how boring and terrible doing dishes is. On the left-hand side, we have Alice Walker, an excerpt from Everyday Use. And this is talking about an everyday woman in the domestic sphere too, but rather than a middle-class woman, this is a black Southern woman that's from a lower economic class. So we see her here. In real life, I'm a large, big-boned woman with rough, man-working hands. In the winter, I wear flannel nights gowns to bed and overalls during the day. I can clean a hog as mercilessly as a man. My fat keeps me hot in zero weather. I can work outside all day breaking ice to get water for washing. And then this continues, and what's interesting to me is the end. My hair glistens in the hot, bright lights. Johnny Carson has much to do to keep up with my quick and witty tongue. It's a woman imagining herself, but also in opposition to celebrity culture. So we're reclaiming these home spheres as a lived bodily experience and also as spheres of protest. Alright, as we're closing out this video, we'll think about the legacy of the movement. A big thing that is done here is this process of reshaping the canon. I'll say this is an evolving process. I'm a millennial, but when I went to high school, the literature I experienced was really male-dominated and sexist, and I think it's continuing to see an integration of women, but this was a project they started in the 60s and 70s. And it's kind of two facets of the process: reclaiming past women, diving into the wreck. And before them, it's really almost like Emily Dickinson or bust. But in my own education in college, it, of course, wasn't perfect, but I saw an integration of more women's writers. I think in your generation, you're going to continue to see this. These are voices that were silenced over time, and feminist writers reclaimed them. Perhaps most symbolically is the figure of Sappho, that one of the first writers in Greece from thousands of years ago. And her poems are literally deleted because her texts were burned. So they are reclaiming these voices that were there but often silenced through history. Number two is reshaping of the contemporary canon. What we'll see in the last few weeks of this class is an integration of all the writers, whereas coming up to this point, we've been talking about movements like black arts and feminist arts. So in the last 20 or 30 years, the literary mainstream has finally begun to accept minority voices. And again, this is not an equal process. It's still biased towards people that look like me, white men. And so the second thing, women's writing groups are so pivotal to how writing is taught nowadays. So they would do these workshops outside of the academy, and this would influence the workshops that are in the academy, the MFAs. So this helps incorporate women into the movement and also shapes how writing's trained. And it's a democratizing process in two ways. And before the 60s, 70s, the academy was really limited to the upper class. And so by doing it outside the academy, it opens it up to different groups of women. And once the MFA is integrated into the academy, as you know now, many of you all are on the Promise or the 2-year scholarship. The academy is open to people of different classes nowadays. Finally, a new range of subjects is available in literature. We can write about our inner lives, we can write about politics, etc., etc. And in the poetry Change the World documentary, the male poet Kevin Young says, I probably couldn't have written about my child had not women pioneered writing about children, because they said, this isn't literature, writing about children. So all these new topics open up the range of human expression, not just for women, but for everybody. But in a big way, an important way, we're talking about things from a female's perspective, something we haven't seen before. Some challenges of the legacy. Well, women of color are not completely represented in this group, and this is a big challenge that the third and subsequent waves of feminism deal with. We see Audre Lorde and Alice Walker, but the majority of these voices are white middle-class women. And so they're going to push feminism to be more inclusive, but this initial movement is more white people. And the other challenge of the movement is it's mostly upper class people. So we're not yet hearing the voices of lower class women. By lower class, I mean less economic power. I think Alice Walker's story is a big exception. And the other parts of the LGBTQ coalition are not represented in the early waves of this movement either. Another struggle of the second wave feminists is the Equal Rights Amendment, the amendment to the Constitution that wanted to formally declare equality between the sexes is defeated. So women are not considered formally equal in the United States Constitution. This is still an ongoing movement. This was defeated in the 70s. So the work of equality was not achieved. This is why women can be paid less, because in the Constitution they don't have to be. And this is a major goal of the movement that's not achieved. And this is not to the discredit of the women's movement so much as their opponents who are against this movement for equality. And much like the other protest movement in the 60s, there's sort of a deal that's made. They said, we will give you these individual liberties you want, like your sexual freedom, but we will not give you justice, we will not give you fairness, we will not give you economic equality. But these were goals of the movement, and these are goals that are not achieved. These are also goals of the Black Arts Movement and the Civil Rights Movement. So essentially a compromise is made where fairness, justice, equality are not achieved, but more individual liberties granted. And the movements did want fairness, justice, and equality. Finally, and we're looking at a lot of the criticisms, but it also continues to inspire contemporary protests like Me Too and protests against rape, things like that.